Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. So this one's one that I'm doing completely on the fly. I haven't really got too much preparation for it, but I've seen the news that came out a few days ago about the DC Omniverse. I'm a little bit confused and I'm not sure if anybody else is, so I thought that I'd come and sit in front of the camera, I'd discuss some of my thoughts, some of my hypotheses, and we'd see exactly where this is going to go. I don't really tend to do too much when it comes to breaking news because I'm not really on the ball enough that I can really get across something at the time when it's relevant. But I thought I'd make an exception for this because it seems like such a bizarre decision that DC is taking in a year that's been filled with bizarre decisions from DC. The article that I read came from bleedingcool.com and I'm going to link it down below. There are so many different opinions and everybody's got so many different theories that I just thought I needed to make sense of it all. And fair warning, I don't really read single issues, I tend to wait for something to come out in a collected edition, so there might be some minor things here and there that I'm not fully aware of, but don't worry, somebody's probably going to correct me in the comments anyway. So one of the key parts of this article says that what remains of the New 52 after DC Rebirth, Death Metal and Future State is being done away with in favour of an Omniverse model, in which characters and comic books are no longer tied to a strict continuity but will play fast and looser with history. And then skipping a bit further down into the article, it says, because some disquiet I have heard is that Dan DiDio's expressed status of the new DC universe that everything happened, everything matters, may become an everything happened, nothing matters. So effectively at the beginning of 2021, DC is going to do something called Future State, where there's a line of like alternate universe books that are all set in the future, and we all thought that was just going to be like a 2-month little break where they're just going to tell random stories about these characters, but it seems like it's going to have more lasting effects. I'm not going to lie, I initially was quite excited because I thought an Omniverse meant that they were actually going to get some control over their omnibus department and maybe get some of them across to the UK. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the case and I'm just going to have to keep importing them from America. But from what I've read so far, it sounds to me like this Omniverse is basically just going to be a reset of the DC universe in every single story that it's ever telling. From my understanding, if continuity means absolutely nothing now between the lines, then you could effectively have Barbara Gordon as Batgirl in one book and you could also have her as Oracle in another, because there's no longer going to be any connections or anything like that, and for me it sounds like it's only going to be the individual lines where continuity matters. And it sounds like this is all going to start happening after Future State, and I don't really know if Future State is the reason why all these things are going to happen in the same way that Flashpoint brought about the New 52, but more so than that, I don't know if DC's got such a vested interest in this Future State storyline that they're doing that that's the reason why they're going into an Omniverse model, because then effectively if Future State does work and there's some characters that people really like, they can integrate them into other stories and they can also just keep them in their continuity, even though the fact that continuity doesn't exist anymore, and it's not really going to affect things too much if there's a character that was originally from the future that's now in some kind of Batman or Superman line. For me, I think that's a massive gamble on a storyline that they don't even know if it's really going to work when it's only for 2 months anyway, and I think it's a bad way of going about it to effectively reset the line with a future storyline that most people don't want anyway. Don't get me wrong, there's some bits of Future State that I like so far. I like the design of the new Batman costume and things like that, and I always like stories set in the future, so it is probably going to be something that I would actually enjoy. However, if I'm enjoying it as a way of restarting the DC universe, and I think it's going to have too much of a weight behind it for me to actually enjoy any of the stories as they're going on. For me, I think they're going about this the wrong way round, in the same way that they did with How I Met Your Mother Season 9, because Future State is the thing that should be separate from any kind of continuity. It shouldn't be the thing that's ushering in this new universe of non-continuity based storytelling, and if DC really wants Future State to be something that the fans and the readers really enjoy, then I don't think this is the right way to go about it. It should just be something that's a little bit more carefree in the same way of Age of Apocalypse. Now obviously I wasn't reading comics at that time, but when Age of Apocalypse was originally coming out, people were told that this was the new X-Men series forever. That Professor Xavier is always going to be dead, they're always going to be living in Apocalypse's universe, and Wolverine is always just going to have one hand. But then it lasted for a little bit, the continuity went back to normal, and all of a sudden people remember Age of Apocalypse with a lot more fondness. Whereas I remember hearing from people at my comic shop that they hated that when it was coming out, because they thought that that was all they were going to get now in future and they'd lost all the characters that they'd liked before. So in the same way, if the reason that Future State exists is so that they can usher in this Omniverse, and I think people are going to look at Future State with a lot of disdain. But that brings me on to my next point, and like I said, I've kind of done this video on the fly, so I've had to formulate my thoughts quite quickly, and that's probably why I'm talking at the speed of light. But my second main point that I really wanted to bring up, because I've seen so many people already hate this idea before it's come into circulation, is will this actually be a thing for long enough for us to care about? Now yeah, I wasn't reading comics when Age of Apocalypse happened, but I was when the New 52 happened. I was in my teenage years at this time and I was quite fresh into comics, and it was when I was really picking up single issues. And I remember like the generation of comic readers just above me, they absolutely hated the idea of the New 52. They hated the fact that every storyline that they've liked before all of a sudden just means nothing, and effectively it left the door open for just a rehash of storytelling. So when I hear people get angry and upset about the fact that this DC Omniverse is happening, it reminds me entirely of when the New 52 was announced, because we were told that that was going to be the way moving forward. We should still technically be in the New 52 right now, but But there's one thing that I feel is consistent when it comes to comics, it's the fact that everything changes. So I'm looking at this Omniverse announcement and I'm getting the exact same vibes that I did with the New 52. But in a weird way that does kind of give me a bit of hope, because it was about 6 months or so ago that it got announced that DC was cutting distribution ties with Diamond. And everybody went into a panic about that and thought that this was going to be the end of DC, and we kept saying that DC is going to have to do something major to get people to still buy their comics now that they have to do it kind of on their own. So because it didn't have those same distribution ties, we wondered if it was going to affect the availability of books for new readers. I think if they're trying to attract new people into comics, I think this is probably the best way to go about it. That isn't me saying that I think this is overall a great idea and that DC's done something really smart, because let's be honest, it does sound a bit stupid when you first think about it. But if you're somebody who does want to get into comics, maybe you've watched a recent film that's come out, it is quite difficult to find that entry point. Obviously your boy does a series called Where to Start, and I've also done one for DC Comics, so if you're wondering, I've got that one up there. But if you want to get into single issues and you really want to be immersed into the month-to-month buying of comics, it is quite difficult for you to do. This approach is actually a great way to ensure that people can just pick up any issue of a DC comic and all of a sudden just be able to read it. At best, there's only going to be a few issues that they need to catch up on, and now that we've got stuff like DC Unlimited, it's going to be very easy to do that. So from a business standpoint, I do actually think there might be some kind of sound reasoning that's gone into this decision, because admittedly, as much as the older generation of comics might hate it, I really like the New 52 because of the fact that it allowed me to learn about a lot of new characters. It let me read a Swamp Thing book, and then from there I could go into the Alan Moore stories. It let me read Animal Man, and then I could go back and read Grant Morrison. It's a risky strategy because you can't always guarantee that you're going to get new eyes into your book, but it is something that I've realised in the last couple of years, that if you want comics to keep going, if you want them to print new books and eventually have new omnibuses and new collected editions, you have to get new people reading them. Because of the fact that comics are really only accessible through a comic shop, and because of this pandemic meaning that comic shops haven't been open for a long time, there hasn't been that way to get new people through the door and picking up issues. Obviously people who've loved comics for years are always going to continue reading them, but that crowd is thinning out year after year. So DC does have to kind of take some kind of bold new approach, and even though we don't know if this is going to pan out well or not, I think as an executive decision this might have been the best thing that they can do to try and ensure the survival of DC Comics as a whole. And yes, there is always a possibility that maybe we're being a little bit over dramatic and this announcement isn't really a big of a deal as we're making it out to be, but I'm not gonna lie, I do kind of like doing these theorising videos. And the last point that I really wanted to bring up is the fact that how much does continuity really matter? Now don't hate me, I'm not saying that continuity doesn't matter at all, that's not what I'm saying, but what I am saying is that I think the reaction that people are having to this announcement is probably more to do with their own personal beliefs about continuity. Now I do have a bit of a double standard when it comes to this topic, because I feel like continuity should matter to the writer and the creator of that book, but I don't really think it should matter to the reader. Because I've said this before, when it was like the 60s and Marvel Comics was really coming into its stride, people didn't really have that backlog of comics that they could go to. Most people did have to start at a random issue in the middle of a run, and yeah, those were more self-contained, but at the same time, you did have to go back and find out more about those characters. So say it was like an issue 40 of a book, continuity obviously mattered because of the fact that that writer had known about the continuity for that character for the 39 issues before. But for that reader, continuity didn't matter at all when they were going through that single issue. If they chose to, they could go back and get that continuity and learn more about that character, but in that moment when they were reading that book for the first time, continuity meant nothing. And I'm kind of the same with you, because obviously I like the X-Men, but I wouldn't say that I'm like the biggest X-Men fan of all time or that I've read many of the stories. But there's so many different storylines when it comes to the X-Men, so many characters, so many retcons for those characters, that it would be impossible for me to actively follow it and still enjoy the story that I'm reading. So for me, when it comes to that team, I pick my continuity. I like New X-Men, so that's in my continuity. I like the Dark Phoenix saga, so that's in my continuity. And to be fair, I do it for the exact same with the X-Men films, because the X-Men films continuity makes no sense to me anyway. Yeah, there's probably some timeline that somebody's got that would clear it up, but really can't be bothered with that right now. But for example, you could just watch Logan and that could be your entire X-Men continuity. If you like Deadpool, you could have your X-Men continuity as just Deadpool and Logan. If you like the original X-Men trilogy, you can put that into it as well. Perhaps you only like First Class, Days of Future Past, but you hate Apocalypse and the Dark Phoenix film. So you can split it and just have those two films in your continuity and then maybe combine it with the original trilogy. Sure, the continuity is not always going to be clear, but even if you were watching them in the order that they were released or the order that they were meant to be watched in, you're still not really going to get a full sense of continuity with it. And that's the way that I treat continuity in general. If I'm reading a Batman book and all of a sudden Harvey Dent appears rather than Two-Face, I'm just going to go with it. As long as the writer knows why he's Harvey Dent rather than Two-Face, that's all that really matters for me. I'm not going to go back and go, oh well, did he get facial reconstruction surgery? Is this a retcon and he's never been Two-Face before? Sometimes yes, those details do help and they are important. You can't really read a Batman story and not know who Alfred is, or you can't know that his parents have been killed. And you know, with this new new continuity that's happening in the DC Omniverse, do those bits of continuity even exist? Are we going to get the Flashpoint Thomas Wayne, or is he just going to be dead, or are we going to get both? But for me, I think as long as the writer that's doing the story uses continuity to tell the best story that they can and still kind of makes it somewhat accessible for the reader that's reading that book then and there, then I'm actually kind of comfortable with whatever DC have got planned with this Omniverse. And as well, I do think it's very early days, and I get why people are a bit apprehensive to say that this is going to be a good idea or not. And at the moment, all we can do is theorise. None of us have read any of these books just yet, and it sounds like Jeff Johns, shit, I need a drink. From the article I read, it sounds like he's been drawn in to do some kind of event that's going to kind of clear up everything to do with this Omniverse. And considering that he did Infinite Crisis and Flashpoint, I'm just happy to go along with whichever story he's going to tell. So although I do understand why people are annoyed with this announcement, and I can kind of understand if you're really enjoying a certain run on a book, it'd be disappointing to hear that this is going to happen and all of a sudden it means nothing. It's just important that you remember that regardless of what the company does overall, as long as that book means something to you, then that book is in continuity. You never know, this could be something great. I like a ton of the Elseworld stories that I've read, so who knows, this might be an entire universe that's basically just Elseworld stories left, right and centre. I'm kind of down for whatever happens. I'm going to wait for further announcements to see if I'm going to jump into any kind of single issues of these series. Who knows, maybe this is a really positive move for DC overall, and we could come back a year from now, the continuity is being reset again to whatever Rebirth's at now, and it really didn't mean anything. Because like I said, everybody reacted the exact same way when the New 52 was announced nearly 10 years ago. So let's just see what happens, let's hope for the best, and who knows, we might get some of the best storytelling as a result of this. Creators now can tell whatever stories they want to, and often the best stories come when a creator has no kind of restrictions on them. But that's all I'm really going to say on the matter, and like I said, this has been my immediate reaction to it. There could be news by the time that I've published this video that counteracts a lot of the things that I've said in here, and let's just be honest, I'm wrong most of the time anyway. But I'd like to hear what you think about the DC Omniverse. Are you excited for it? Are you worried about it? Or are you just not bothered at all? Leave it in the comment section below and we can discuss it further there. But if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't like this video, why did you get this far? Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers that I still just can't really believe it. And I put videos out as soon as I can. There's no kind of schedule or anything like that, so I really recommend clicking the bell notification so that you never miss a video. And check out some of my links up here. I'm always trying to make sure that I put as much comic content on there as I can, and I do polls and things like that. Maybe I'll put one up to see what your reaction to DC Omniverse is. And if you'd like to support the channel, it is greatly appreciated. I haven't got a Patreon or anything like that. All they ask is that you treat yourself to a book, but you just use one of the Amazon affiliate links down below. I can't see any of your details. It doesn't increase the price. It just means that eventually some money's going to come into this channel, and I'll hopefully be able to buy a new camera. But hopefully you've enjoyed this video, even if it isn't as structured as it normally is and it's a bit more rushed than usual. But please just make sure that you stay safe, keep reading, and keep barking all you mad dogs, and I'll see you in the next video.